Hello everyone, welcome to another ATRA webinar. Today's presentation is sponsored by Seal Aftermarket Products. Special thanks to Seal Aftermarket for sponsoring all our webinars, making them free to everyone, including non-members. A few days after this webinar is aired, you can go to the ATRA website and download the video of it. If you're a non-member of ATRA, just go to Seal Aftermarket Products website, as you see here on the screen, and you can download it from there. Let me play you a short video from Seal.
Seal Aftermarket Products engineers and manufactures Toledo Transkit, the most trusted and complete kits in the industry for 25 years. Toledo Transkit gives you more critical components, more OE components, like premium seals and gaskets, more design enhancements, patented components, and all the little extras you won't find elsewhere. At Seal Aftermarket Products, we don't just make kits, we make kits better. Toledo Transkit is the #1 choice of installers because of all the intensive research and development that goes into each component in every kit. Like re-engineered valve body gaskets, preventing EPC damage by eliminating the shredding you get from original equipment. Plus, all of the extra essentials that are included, like spring and screen filters that should be changed at overhaul. Toledo Transkit even includes loose valve body gaskets that fit all 19 bonded separator plates. When servicing Honda and Acura transmissions, shaft nuts are quite often damaged during removal. Toledo Transkit provides all the main shaft, secondary shaft, and counter shaft nuts, so you don't have to try to reuse the originals or pay extra for them at the dealer. Honda Acura kits also include valve body screen filters, pressure tap washers, and other important components like bolt locks, roll pins, and pistons. What you get is a complete kit with great fit and no wasted time or worry about ordering extra parts. If you want the best sealing transmission kit in the industry, ask for Toledo Transkit by name.
Okay, with that out of the way, any questions or comments, please send your emails to webinars@atra.com. We would like to hear any suggestions you may have for the webinars for 2016. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to go ahead and text them over to me, and I will try to answer those best as I can. And this is the schedule for the rest of the year. We'll have the next webinar will be September 29th and 30th, and that'll be on the 6R60 ZF6HP comparison. Also, October 13 and 14, the A760. There'll also be the A960 and the AB60 comparison webinar. And of course, the expo this year is the same place as last year, the Rio in Las Vegas. It's going to be Halloween weekend, October 29th through November 1st. And here's the schedule for the rest of the seminars this year throughout the United States. As you can see, this weekend will be in Chicago, and I'll be there and hope to see a lot of my friends there. Along with the door prizes given away by the vendors, this year ATRA has been giving away a few of our own. We have 1 free month membership to ATRA. If you're already a member and you win that, we'll just take a month off your bill. We also have a free expo management registration. You can go to all the management seminars. You just have to pay your way there and your expenses while you're there. Also, we're giving away last year's expo book, almost 800 pages of text. And the grand prize, we're giving away a full registration for all the tech seminars or management seminars you want to go to, along with the 4-night stay at the Rio. Today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the 5R110W, which Ford calls the torque shift. We're going to cover problems and fixes for this transmission. This is a no movement condition after rebuild. Now, this problem usually happens after a mismatch of pump parts. The pump change in 2005 is not interchangeable with the 03 to 04. In other words, we can't swap the parts back and forth. But as a complete assembly, the 05 pump will retro back to the earlier models. As you see here on this page, we're showing you the 03 to 04, and the casting number that you'll find on the pump body will be 3C, 3P, and you'll find the same thing on the stator support. And this is the 05 and later pump. Different casting number will have 5C, 3P on both the pump body and the stator support. So let's take a look at some of the differences in the hydraulic circuits that cause the no movement if you swap these parts around. As you can see on the left, what we have circled, that's the major difference in the worm tracks. So that's why we can't swap these parts back and forth. Another area I want you to look at is right in this area. This is the TCC control valve. On the earlier models, this bore is just a little bit shorter than the 05 and later. And you can see that right by this area right there. We're going to cover that a little bit later on in the webinar. Now for the pump body itself, you can see the early one on the left, and we have the 05 and later on the right. There's quite a difference there in the worm tracks. So if the hydraulics change, obviously the plate that goes to the pump will change also. So we just don't want to mix these parts around. Keep everything as a complete assembly for the correct year, and you should be fine. Been a lot of calls in the tech line lately about this transmission as well as others, but we seem to be getting a lot of calls on the 5R110 with a spun pump bushing, or it'll actually have the pump gears welded into the pump plate. Now we've seen this in the past on other transmissions such as the Aisin Seiki, the Mercedes 7229, just as a couple of examples. We covered the 7229 in Gears articles for having this problem. Now here's a few tips that we go through. These should cover just about any transmission that's having this problem. Now the converter pilot is a tight fit with the crankshaft, so we have to make sure that if we buy a rebuilt converter and it's painted, you may want to take the paint off. So make sure that the journal inside is smooth, there's no burrs or nicks. Then we check the crankshaft, the bore where the pilot goes in, make sure that's clean and free of any corrosion or debris. Anything like that can bind the pilot, and obviously that pilot has to move in and out as the flex plate flexes back and forth. Take a little extra time, take your converter, put it up against the flex plate, make sure that the pilot fits smooth and it's got a good fit into the crankshaft. When we bolt up the converter, make sure we pull the converter all the way in towards the flywheel before we tighten up the converter bolts. You may actually have to go around and tighten them each a little bit at a time to make sure that we don't bind the converter in the crankshaft. Also make sure that the engine block and the bell housing is free of any paint, debris, or corrosion. We want a good mating surface for the bell housing to mate up to the engine block, especially for grounding issues. Make sure the dowel pins in the engine are extended out far enough to match up with the holes in the bell housing. Also want to make sure that the dowel pin holes in the bell housing are not worn out. We can always add a ground strap from the engine block to the battery. At my shop, we used to be a standard operating procedure. We stocked a lot of ground straps that we would run a ground strap from one of the bell housing bolts over to the frame. We didn't paint our transmission, so we always had a good ground area right there at the bolt. This is all to help prevent any electrolysis. If you see electrolysis on this unit, what you'll find is some etching right in the pump plate itself. You'll see that. A lot of guys, when they put the pumps together, they squirt a little bit of oil in the pump gears. Some guys have actually been packing the pump gears with some trans gel. Now, back when the Aisin Seiki was having a lot of problems with failing pumps right on the lift, these particular transmissions fill very, very slowly. But the pump will actually pick up the oil in the sump in a matter of seconds. So when you put some oil in the transmission, make sure you either have some ready to pour in right away, or you might want to just go ahead and put in like 8 or 10 quarts before you start up the engine. You can always put 8 or 10 quarts in it, start it up, wait a few seconds, shut it off, and add some more oil and restart the engine again. We do all these things just to prevent any issues with the pump gears wearing into the pump stator. This is a complaint of a delay in reverse, and usually it gets worse as the transmission gets hotter. As you can see, these are factory sealing rings. If the sealing rings are good, you want to reuse them, that's fine. But what you want to do is you want to check these ring grooves. We don't want more than 5/1000ths of an inch play up and down on the rings. But here's something that gets overlooked. Sometimes the bore itself will actually wear inward. So if you're having a poor air check and you have this on the bench and the direct clutch doesn't want to air check correctly, add some string underneath the sealing rings. If you get a better air check at that point, either we have a problem with the rings have worn down or the support itself will have to be replaced. Make sure that we take the string out if everything's good. We don't want to leave the string in there. That's just done for a test. This is a problem I run into every once in a while on the tech lines. It's a bind in reverse, a bind in drive 3, and manual low after rebuild. You'll put it in manual 2 and the transmission seems to be okay. Another symptom that you may feel is as you're taking off, it feels like it's taking off in a higher gear than first when you're in the overdrive position. Now, the 2006 later models, the overdrive pressure plate has a raised step that goes all the way around it, as you see here in the picture. And at one side, you'll have an extended tab that goes out over one of the lugs. Now, the difference between this plate and the earlier style is only about 0.02 of an inch. So swapping these plates back and forth should not be a problem. Now, Ford says they're not interchangeable, but I haven't had any issues using the earlier plate in place of the later one. Matter of fact, most of the suppliers will supply the earlier style plate, and it costs much less. When the call came in with these symptoms, I kind of went over the component apply chart, and as you can see in red, what I figured out was if the overdrive clutch was mechanically on for any reason, that would give me that bind in reverse. Also would give me that higher takeoff in first gear, as you see here. Obviously, if the overdrive clutches are staying on, it's not going to take off in the correct ratio. Now in manual 3 and manual low, again, that will cause a binding effect because we have a brake clutch that's on that shouldn't be. Now the later plate that has the extra tab on it, that has to go down in this area that you see in the case that's cut out. That's where that tab has to align. Now there's a snap ring that goes underneath that. As you can see over to the right, the opening of the snap ring should be on either side of that opening in the case. As you can see here, we have the snap ring going into that open area so that once we put the pump down with our tab there, it's going to mechanically lock the clutches. So we don't want to make that mistake. If you think you made that mistake and you want to just check it without pulling the transmission, you can always drop the valve body and go in with a scribe or a small thin screwdriver and see if those clutches are movable. They should be nice and loose. There shouldn't be any bind up on the clutch at all. Obviously, if it is, at that point we don't have a choice. We have to remove the transmission and relocate the opening of the snap ring. Other engagement issues that I run through, especially on vehicles with a lot of high mileage on them, these are work trucks that are constantly worked hard, so with the high mileage they're constantly shifting them. You'll see that the actual pin has worn out here on the left of the internal rain sensor. Now there's an updated rain sensor, that's the one you see in the middle, but as you can see on the right, there's the older one where the pin is extremely worn. Now for this to be an intermittent problem, if the TCM doesn't see what you've selected, it will not actually apply the clutch. So at times, if the pin would actually hit the worm track and move the sensor, you would get a reverse engagement or a forward engagement, and at times you may not get any engagement at all, depending on how much the pin is not moving along with the worm track. And there's the new sensor on the left. We're showing you the old one on the right, and you can see where the tension spring is for the pin. And the updated one has a longer spring that puts a little bit more tension on that on the pin for the worm track and the rooster comb. There's a number of things that we have issues with pressure problems on this transmission, but this is the one that's most often overlooked. As you can see, this is check ball castle. This is for the line pressure relief. It works the same way as the EPC relief found on the E4ODs, as we're showing you there on the right. You know, in the past when we first started doing those transmissions, sometimes they would put the spring and ball in upside down, and that would give us no pressure. Or if the check ball fell off and we had it installed the way you see in the photo, the same thing would happen. Well, this works the same way. This capsule, as you can see, the one on the left, the check ball is seated fine, the spring is pushing it down, and the one on the right has some kind of piece of debris or something in there holding the check ball off, so this could give us a pressure loss. Now, don't remove this from the valve body. We only did that for demonstration. You can see by the ribs in this capsule, it's a one-time press-in fit. Once you knock this out, the aluminum will be ruined and you won't be able to get it back in tight. Now, as far as swapping solenoids around, as you can see, they all have the same color connector. Even when you remove them from the solenoid block itself, even the snouts all look the same. So just because it looks like a duck doesn't mean it's always going to quack like a duck. These solenoids do work differently. Now, some of the solenoids are what's called directly proportional. These are solenoids with high amperage, they'll have high pressure. And that's the TCC solenoid, shift pressure control solenoids B, C, and E. Now we have 3 other solenoids that are inversely proportional. They work the opposite way, and that's with low amperage will have higher pressure. Now the PCA solenoid is for line pressure. Then you have shift solenoid pressure control A and D. Now an easy way to identify these, if you look at the back of the solenoid, you can see there's an adjustment screw, and they look different on both the different types of solenoids. Another thing that we want to look at, if you look at the front of the solenoids, now the one on the left and the one in the center are inversely proportional. And as you can see, the PCA solenoid, the one for line pressure, the 2 tabs are actually in the center of the bore. Where the other 2, the shift solenoid pressure control A and D, the tabs are a little bit lower than center. And then all the directly proportional solenoids, the lineup tabs would be above center, closer to the connector. Now, one of the things I want to point out here, if you do want to swap solenoids around, obviously if the solenoid is the same, you can do that. But as you can see with the inversely proportional solenoids, the PCA solenoid for line pressure is the one on the left with the small hole at the end of the snout. Now the other 2 have a larger hole in them. Now we've had some techs that will actually take the line pressure control solenoid and swap it with solenoid D, trying to get a firmer shift out of the direct clutch. Now keep in mind that when you do that, it's going to cause firmer upshifts and downshifts, and the customer may complain about it. Now the reason that these 2 are different is the line pressure solenoid regulates the pressure at approximately 190 psi, where the other 2 only regulate at about 140. Well, obviously if we switch it the other way around, if we put the large hole in place of the small one, we're going to have a problem with our max pressure. Now, if you're having shift problems, these are synchronized shifts, so engine tune and clutch clearance is going to play a major factor. Now, in some cases, in the 08 and later models, we've actually had a code set when the PCA solenoid was used in place of the shift solenoid D, and we'd actually get a code P2703, direct clutch failed on or off, because the actual clutch apply was a little faster than what the computer software was programmed for. Understanding how a transmission works is always the best way to try to diagnose it. Every once in a while I'll get a call from areas like up in Canada or in the northern parts of the state. Down here in South Florida it doesn't really get cold enough, but this is actually a 6-speed transmission that only utilizes 5 gears. Guys will call me up, they'll say that when it's extremely cold, they'll have a 4th gear command, and then once it warms up, they don't see a 4th gear command anymore. As you can see in the red square in the chart on the left, that overdrive for 4th is only commanded when the temperature is below minus 15 Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as you can see, that there's not much of a ratio difference between fourth and fifth, but the strategy behind this is to try to put less load on the engine when it's cold, and obviously still saving fuel. This is a really big problem with these transmissions. We're seeing it more so on the later models than we did on the earlier ones. As you can see, especially with these heavy-duty trucks or these motorhomes that are equipped with this transmission, you may find a hairline crack right along where the red arrow is pointing to. Now, you may air check this cold on the bench and it'll air check fine. Obviously, once the transmission heats up, the crack can open up more, the oil is thinner, and we can have a leak to that clutch. It'll actually set all these codes that you see here. Now, P0751, when the computer commands that clutch to come on and it slips, the computer automatically blames the solenoid as a failure. Not electrical, it's saying the solenoid's failing mechanically because it commanded the coast clutches on and it detected a slip. Now, P0730 is just a gear ratio error. It doesn't define which gear. And then, of course, we have the factory-specific code, the P2700, for the coast clutch failed on or off. Now, these will all be stored in the computer system. Now, we give you the OE part number to replace the drum from Ford if you'd like. What some shops are doing as a precaution is they add a weld all the way around the drum to prevent any cracks that could happen even in the future. Now, here's a situation with the actual gear is broken off of the drum. You'll end up with the same two of the codes. You'll end up with those two codes stored in the TCM. Obviously, the gear faces down inside the drum. We're just showing you in this photo how it just completely breaks off. At this point, we'd have no movement. We'd have the same type of codes that we have if it was just cracked. If any of you guys are working on these LCF trucks and you don't have a scan tool or the software that can communicate with these style trucks, we have a manual code retrieval that we've given you here. What you're showing you on the left is the tow haul switch. First thing we're going to do is turn the key on, but do not start the engine. We're going to place the shifter in the 2 position, and then we're going to press the tow haul switch 4 times within 4 seconds. Now, this will initiate the actual code retrieval. Now, once the process is initiated, what you're going to see happen is the check trans, the trans temp, and the tow haul indicator lamps will all turn on together. This indicates that the diagnostic mode has been entered. Now, the next thing you'll see is the check trans and the trans temp indicators turning off, leaving only the tow haul indicator on. Now, when the codes start to appear, you'll see the check trans indicator start to blink, and we're going to count those flashes, and that's going to tell us what our code is. We've given you an example here. If it flashes 1 time and pauses, then we get 2 flashes and a pause, another 2 flashes and a pause. That's a code 122. And that code would be a P0711, which is for the temp sensor. Now, if there's more than 1 fault code present, what will happen is the trans temp indicator will flash once in between each of the fault codes. Now, after all the fault codes have been flashed, the trans temp indicator will flash twice, and then the tow haul indicator will turn off. That lets you know that you've gotten all the codes out of the system. Now, when we want to go and clear the codes, basically we turn the key off, we cycle it back on, do not start the engine, put the shifter in the D position, and now push the tow haul switch once. We're going to do the same thing in neutral, reverse, and park. Once we've done this, the check trans, the trans temp, and the tow haul indicators will all flash 3 times, and this indicates that all the codes have been cleared. In your handout material, I've also included all the list of all the 3-digit codes and the PO code that goes with it. So you have that information in your handout material. As you can see here, there's quite a few codes, so I tried to look up all of them that I could find, and I placed that in the handout material. Okay, transmission overheating. We get a few calls on this once in a while, and normally you would find this cooler bypass thermal element in the valve body, but this particular transmission, they put it in the stator support. So obviously there's no access to it through the sump. So if we have a problem with overheating and we suspect this to be the problem, we would have to go ahead and remove the transmission. Now you can always test this while you have it on the bench. Hold the element with a pair of pliers, heat it up, and see if the pin in front of it extends out. Now we've given you all the measurements for it. If you actually wanted to block this valve, now that's something I could get away with down here in South Florida. It's not something I would suggest in cold areas. They want the fluid to warm up to operating temperature quicker before they start to flow it through the cooling system to cool it down. So in areas like in Canada and up north, the fluid gets really cold. It gets the viscosity gets very heavy, and that could actually restrict the flow through the cooling system. We don't want to do that, so this is something I wouldn't block off in cold areas. Now, in some cold areas, or even areas where there's any kind of restricted cooler conditions, we've had the low diode fail. As you can see, the return line comes to the back of the transmission. That's the first thing that gets lubed, is that area. So in really cold conditions, like I said before, sometimes the restriction of the cooler doesn't get enough oil back, then we've seen the low diode fail. Now, units from 03 to 07 have a cooler bypass remote filter assembly. So the bypass is a pressure bypass built right in that filter area. So if there's any restriction or anything on those models, it's not a problem with oil getting back to the transmission for the lube circuit. Now the pumps for those vehicles will be the same part number as the later one, except it ends with AB. Now the 08 and 09 trucks that are not equipped with that external inline filter have the same rough forged numbers, except for the last two letters are AC. Now the pumps are quite different for the units that have no external filter. So this is how the 06 to 07 models work. As you can see on the left, we're showing you the circuit for the whole flow mode with the external filter. So as you can see, the thermal element is not extended, so the valve is up. We can actually get our cooler flow, a lube circuit going right into the lube circuit and feeding our lube. If there was any problems with this model having the remote filter, obviously the bypass would still allow us to get lube oil back to the trans. Now once it goes into the hot mode, the cooler bypass will extend the thermal element. Now we actually block off this lube circuit. So obviously if we didn't have a bypass here, we'd have a problem with lube getting back to the transmission. Now the difference between the two pumps you'll see on the inside of the stator support. This is the one with the external filter. This land has got a smooth area across it. Now in the 08 and 09 without the external filter, there's an actual orifice cut into that land, and the width is 78 thousandths and the depth is about 50 thousandths. And that's what I'm showing you here in the bottom left. That's what the actual orifice looks like. And you can see in the hot flow mode on the right, we have the thermal element extended. So the valve is stroked downward. It blocks off that circuit for lube. But with our orifice, even if our cooler was completely blocked, we would still get lube oil going into our transmission, and we wouldn't have a problem with the diodes failing. Here's an odd complaint we see every once in a while, and this is venting issues. Oil coming out of the vent, and this is caused by the dipstick actually hitting the valve body in this area where the dipstick is not going all the way down as far down as it's supposed to. So obviously with the dipstick being up higher, we end up putting in too much fluid, and that's why it starts to come out the vent. What some techs have actually done is take a thin piece of sheet metal, cut a hole in it, put it right there under the valve body bolt, and then they'll bend it down like this. That way there, when the dipstick comes in, it can't hit the valve body, and we don't have a problem with that. I've seen this quite often on the earlier E4OD models, where the dipstick was actually too short right from the factory. Now the best way to check that is with the pan off and the dipstick all the way down into the filler tube. The full mark should actually line up with the pan rail. We have a lot of problems with these pumps. They warp real easy, and we have a lot of venting issues because of it. Basically what will happen is you'll have a cross leak into a pressure circuit that will come out through the vent. Now sometimes machining the original pump, because it's already what we call weathered in, it's gone through cycles of hot and cold, so the metal has less of a tendency to warp again. You may want to machine the original one down. Obviously, if we put a new pump in it, over time the same thing could happen. Once it goes through a few cycles of hot and cold, it could warp like the original one did. Now, there's a less costly alternative for this if you want to purchase this Transgo kit, and the part number is 5R110 vent. And basically what they do is they give you this guide plate. You would bolt this on onto the pump stator, and then this hole would line up with the vent hole. Basically what we're doing now is we're going to drill down in there with a 1/4-inch drill, approximately halfway. It's not real fussy. When it's done, we just want to make sure there's no burrs or any pieces of metal that could come out and get into the pump. But we're just basically opening up the vent to an area that has no pressure. So to do that, now we have to go back and we have to block off the other side. So obviously if I have a cross leak into this circuit from anywhere with high pressure, that's what's causing the vent to leak. Now we take the freeze out plug, put it down in the hole using a flat punch, and that should take care of it. We have shift and engagement complaints. Sometimes we'll even have solenoid performance codes. Now these are high mileage vehicles, and basically this block is no more than a solenoid block. The only valve that's in there is the manual valve. Now what I'm suggesting is if you take the solenoid, when you put the snout down inside the valve body, the bore, take the solenoid and make sure it doesn't move back and forth, because these are pulse solenoids. So over time on high mileage vehicles, I've seen where the bores are actually wearing out, becoming loose. So obviously if we have any leaks in this area, we're going to have problems with shifts, and then you'll end up with solenoid performance codes. This is a strange one we run into once in a while. This is falling out of gear. You may actually go into limp mode during startup, and you may actually have some rain sensor codes. We've had techs check out both the PCM and the rain sensor, couldn't find any problems. They've actually replaced both, only to have the same complaint happen. If you look at the wire schematic for some of these vehicles, you'll find that the electronic fan clutch is part of the circuit. And if you're looking at your rain sensor during the time when the fan clutch is coming on, you may actually see some erratic rain switch data on the scan tool. Now you can unplug the fan clutch, and if the rain sense data goes back to normal, we know that we have some type of a problem with the harness. The pigtail is part of the fan clutch itself. It likes to rub through right down by the fan shroud, and that's when the problems begin. So you can change the fan clutch, comes with a new pigtail attached, or you can try to repair the wiring and maybe move it away from the fan shroud. This problem here I only ran into one time. As a matter of fact, when I took the tech call, I really didn't have an answer for the guy. I had never run into this before. And these are 05 to 06 models. As you can see, they're the real heavy-duty trucks. And what will actually happen is you'll be traveling down the road at highway speeds, and all of a sudden the rear wheels would just lock up. And there'd be no code set. There's no TSB or reflash that we've seen from Ford. I actually talked to some of the other techs here at ATRA, and a few of them have actually run into this before, so it's happened more than once. And like I said, the only fix for this was to replace the PCM. I would have liked to have done some more diagnostics on it, but I didn't really want to ask the tech to go down the highway and take a movie snapshot while he's sliding down the road at 60, 70 miles an hour just to find out what the PCM was possibly commanding. But if you do run into this and you can't find any codes or anything wrong, as far as wiring or anything like that with the PCM. Replacing it was the only fix. We get a lot of calls on the tech line, especially on the 08 and up models. As you can see on the right, that's the low reverse planet with the diode, has all the low reverse clutches as one assembly. This does not come apart. So a lot of guys want to go back to the earlier setup that you see on the left, and a lot of questions as what do we need to do to get the early setup to work in place of the late, because that late setup to replace it is pretty expensive. Now the earlier one has 5 clutches, the later one has 6. And as you can see on the photos here, the one on the left is the early setup with 5 clutches, and it has a bottom plate that is 220 thousandths. And the one on the right doesn't have the backing plate, the thick plate on the bottom, so it holds 6 clutches. So basically, if you wanted to do this, you're going to have to switch it over to the 6 clutches. But you can even do this as an upgrade to an earlier one. You can just take the backing plate out, put in 2 steels in the clutch, and now we have 6 low reverse clutches on either the early or the late. Now when we go over to the earlier assembly, if you do that, you have to add the 2 washers. They're not there on the later one, and normally this is with the short collar. We can just swap these parts out as a complete assembly and not have a problem. If you do have a problem, or if you run into the sunshell that has the longer collar on it, you may not be able to use the earlier planets. But there's another way that we can fix this that it won't cost you that much. What's happened is Alto has come out with some low reverse clutches, and you can see here there's some of the inner teeth have been grinded out. So now we can use the late setup. I'm just showing you the early one on the right to show you the fact that the inner splines will slide past the sun gear now. So we could use the later one. The only problem is we're going to have to get a cutting wheel and cut the old clutches to get them off of the low reverse module that's all in one piece. So this is a pretty easy fix. I've had this call a couple of times, and it's usually what happens is when parts have been swapped around on the pump, and it'll be an intermittent no move after rebuild. Now what's happened is the wrong TCC control valve was installed into the pump stator. Remember earlier we were talking about the difference between the 03, 04 models having a shorter TCC control valve board than the 05. So what happens is the 04 valve is about 200 thousandths shorter, which is almost a quarter of an inch different than the later one. So if we put that early valve in the later support, it's going to actually allow the valve to float around. The valve will actually float around back and forth a quarter of an inch without even hitting the spring, so there will be no tension on the spring at all. And this is the early and later pump. The area that we're talking about is right here. And as you can see on the late one, it's about 200 thousandths deeper. So if we put the shorter valve in there, as you see here, to put them side by side, it's about 200 thousandths shorter. And what will actually happen is by this floating around, at times, if it floats all the way down into the bore, this land will cut off the converter feed. And that's the circuit we're looking at right here. With no oil to the converter, we end up with a no-move condition. Now it could be intermittent because, like I said, this valve is just floating around. So if it floats back towards the spring, you'll have engagement again. So if you think this might be your problem, if you have a no movement intermittently, when it's not moving, check the fluid level. It'll probably read higher because it's not filling the converter. And that about does it for today's presentation, brought to you in part by Ray Bestis. Let me play you a short video from Ray Bestis.
And at Ray Bestis, performance, quality, and reliability are a part of every product.
Hi, I'm Tim Moy from Tim Moy Transmission in Tampa, Florida. I've been rebuilding transmissions since 1975. We have been using the Raybestos GPXs and GPZ clutch plates. We use the GPXs in all our Honda rebuilds. We build a lot of diesel high-performance transmissions, and we use the GPZ clutch plates in this application. We also use them on our everyday heavy-duty, hard-working work trucks with great success. I believe these GPZs are the best clutch plates I've ever used. They give us the durability and the performance that we're looking for.
And at Raybestos, performance, quality, and reliability are a part of every product.
Also, brought to you in part by Whatever It Takes. I want to thank them too for sponsoring our webinars. Again, Seal Aftermarket Products and Toledo Kits for sponsoring all of our webinars. If you have any questions at this point, please feel free to text them over to me. If you don't have time to text them, you can always send them to webinars@atra.com. And I want to thank you all for attending. I really appreciate your time, and I hope I see you again in 2 weeks.